Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a place you might have heard mentioned, maybe just in passing, but its significance is, well, anything but small. Russia's Kaliningrad Oblast. This isn't just some dot on the map, it's a geographically unique place, highly militarized, a sliver of land, really, that sits right at the heart of some pretty intense geopolitical friction. We're talking NATO and Russia. So our mission for you today, go beyond the headlines. We want to uncover what makes Kaliningrad so strategically vital and why a recent, unusually direct warning from a senior U.S. general ignited such a fierce reaction, and how this all connects back to Russia's evolving nuclear strategy and maybe some enduring lessons from, the history of nuclear deterrence. By the end of this deep dive, you should have a really clear understanding of why this small exclave could be a major flashpoint in global affairs. So yeah, let's dig in. All right, to really grasp the current stakes, we kind of have to start with the basics. What exactly is Kaliningrad?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary place, geographically, historically, an anomaly, really. Kaliningrad Oblast is a Russian exclave, which means, it's hundreds of kilometers away from mainland Russia, famously nestled right between two NATO members, Poland and Lithuania. And it's surprisingly compact, roughly the size of Connecticut in the U.S., about 15,100 square kilometers.
And it hasn't always been Russian, has it? This territory has a much older, different story.
Absolutely not. This was originally Königsberg, a German city and the surrounding East Prussia region. After World War II, under the Potsdam Agreement in 1945, it was ceded to the Soviet Union, renamed Kaliningrad in 1946. And then post-war, the German population was largely expelled, replaced by Soviet citizens, mostly ethnic Russians. So it became this isolated, vital Soviet outpost.
And now a Russian one, right on NATO's doorstep.
Exactly.
So it's clearly not just some historical curiosity. It's incredibly strategic for Moscow today. How does this peculiar geography, this separation, translate into military importance for Russia?
Oh, its strategic value is immense, truly immense. It gives Russia a crucial second direct access point to the Baltic Sea. It complements their presence further east, in the Finnish Gulf. But more critically, it serves as the headquarters and the main base for Russia's Baltic Sea Fleet. Dr. Stephen Hall, I think, described it quite accurately as one of the most militarized parts of Europe, essentially like a military base with a city in the middle. It's an advanced base, lets them project power deep into the Baltic.
And we've certainly seen a lot of reports, haven't we, about the sheer volume, the type of weaponry housed there. What kind of arsenal are we actually talking about?
Yeah, indeed. Reports, for instance, from the Carnegie Endowment back in December 2023 indicated a formidable array of weapons, advanced cruise missiles, surface-to-air missiles. But what's maybe even more striking are the claims from Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski just in June 2024. He suggested up to 100 tactical nuclear warheads might be stored at a suspected nuclear weapons site there.
100 tactical nukes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and satellite images from May apparently showed significant reconstruction at that specific site. We know for a fact Russia has been deploying missiles, like Iskander missiles, to Kaliningrad since way back in October 2016. It's a heavily armed fortress.
It certainly sounds like a powder keg, especially when you consider its geographic isolation, which only got more pronounced after Lithuania's independence in 1990, and then both Poland and Lithuania joined NATO and the EU in 2004. That brought strict border controls, didn't it?
Absolutely. It became even more isolated, strategically speaking.
Okay, so with that context, that picture painted, let's talk about what just happened. Very recently, July 17th, 2025, the U.S. Army Europe and Africa Commander, General Chris Donahue, made some incredibly blunt remarks about Kaliningrad. What exactly did he say, and why did it send such a shockwave?
Well, General Donahue issued a remarkably stark warning, directly aimed at the Kremlin. He stated, and this is a quote, that NATO forces could take control of Kaliningrad in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do. These comments are, well, they're certainly some of the strongest yet from a Western military official. It's a very direct statement of capability and maybe intent.
That's not the kind of statement you just toss out there lightly, is it? What was the broader strategic initiative? What was the context behind that warning?
Right. No, it wasn't in a vacuum. These remarks were made explicitly in the context of a new Allied strategy. It's called the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line. And the focus there is squarely on bolstering land forces, integrating defense production, getting everyone on the same page technologically, deploying standardized digital systems for rapid battlefield coordination. And all of this is aggressively applying, quote, lessons learned from the war in Ukraine. Donahue specifically emphasized the increasing importance of the land domain. He explained that new capabilities now allow them to take down anti-access, area denial bubbles, those zones where advanced weapons try to keep enemy forces out.
Right, the A2ADs.
Exactly, to take those down from the ground and even, quote, take over sea from the ground. It's a very assertive posture.
So, a clear message then. Strength, readiness. How did Moscow respond to this direct, almost confrontational warning?
The response from Moscow was, well, swift and predictably severe. The very next day, July 18th, a prominent Russian lawmaker, Leonid Slutsky, as the Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, explicitly warned. He said an attack on the Kaliningrad region will mean an attack on Russia, with all due retaliatory measures, including the use of nuclear weapons.
Wow, straight to nuclear.
Straight there. And he didn't stop. He claimed NATO's deterrence strategy, this whole eastern flank thing, amounted to nothing less than a plan to unleash World War III. And another official, Sergei Muratov, echoed this, declaring, Kaliningrad is Russian territory, and such threats are essentially a declaration of war. So yeah, a complete rejection, doubling down on the severity.
That is incredibly high-stakes language, definitely designed to raise the temperature. But stepping back from a strategic perspective, why would General Donahue choose this moment for such a blunt public statement? What was the goal?
Well, Dr. Stephen Hall offers a pretty key insight here. He suggests Donahue's remarks were likely an attempt to shore up the effect that America is going to be here for the long haul.
Yeah.
And that NATO is going to be a military organization for a lot longer. It's a clear message, aimed straight at the Kremlin, to underscore NATO's resolve. But it's also, and this is crucial, a reassurance to allies, particularly those on the eastern flank, like Lithuania. They joined NATO in 2004, and they've expressed total panic in the past over what they perceived as wavering U.S. commitment to collective defense, especially after certain political events.
Right.
So this statement, this bluntness, seems aimed at cutting through any ambiguity about NATO's Article 5 commitment, a signal of reliability.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the mention of nuclear weapons from Russian officials, it's concerning, obviously, but it's a narrative we've heard quite a bit, haven't we? Especially since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We know Russia's nuclear doctrine has been evolving. What specifically has shifted?
Yeah, you're right. It's become almost background noise, but the shift is real. Since February 2022, Russia's nuclear rhetoric has definitely become, well, the analysis says, more permissive, more inconsistent, and more instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they seem more willing to talk about it, the messaging isn't always consistent, and they're using the threats more overtly as a tool. And alongside the talk, they've significantly ramped up military exercises involving nuclear-capable weapons, often very publicly.
And what's driving this shift in their nuclear posture? Why this increased reliance or apparent reliance on the nuclear option now?
It seems largely, almost directly, a consequence of the severe degradation of Russia's conventional military forces in Ukraine. Reports from reliable sources like Oryx blog, which tracks visual confirmations, they illustrate staggering losses. By August 2023, Russia had lost over 11,600 pieces of equipment. That includes like 2,218 tanks.
Yeah.
Just visually confirmed losses.
Huge numbers.
Huge. So this significant conventional weakness, and you compound that with Western sanctions hitting their economy and resupply, it means Moscow is almost certainly going to rely more heavily on non-conventional instruments, including nuclear weapons. They see them as a, quote, relatively cost-effective option for deterrence, as one of their own generals, Colonel General Karaka, articulated. It compensates for weakness elsewhere.
So, okay, leaning more heavily on the nuclear arsenal to make up for those conventional losses, and Putin himself has even formally modified the doctrine to reflect this change, correct?
That's absolutely right. Back in September 2024, President Putin announced further modifications, and they deliberately introduced significant ambiguities, made the lines much fuzzier. For example, one change says aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear state, would now be considered a joint attack.
Clearly aimed at NATO support for Ukraine.
Precisely. It's clearly aimed at implicating NATO's nuclear states, the US, UK, France, if Ukraine uses Western-supplied weapons on what Russia considers its territory. A very broad interpretation of what constitutes escalation.
And he expanded the specific triggers, too, making it even more nebulous about what could provoke a nuclear response.
Yes, and quite concerningly so. The doctrine now includes using nuclear arms upon, this is key, receipt of reliable information about a massive launch of air and space attack weapons and their crossing of our state border. And they specifically mention strategic and tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, even hypersonic weapons. That's a significant expansion beyond just ballistic missiles, which was the previous focus.
So a drone swarm could theoretically trigger it under this wording?
Under this wording, potentially yes, depending on interpretation of massive and reliable information. And finally, Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression against Russia and Belarus as a member of the Union state, if a conventional attack creates a critical threat to our sovereignty. Now that last phrase, critical threat to our sovereignty, is highly ambiguous. It's clearly intended to signal a much, much lower nuclear threshold than the previous standard, which was a threat to the very existence of the state.
Much lower bar. But, okay, how credible are these threats, really? I mean, experts like Stephen Pfeiffer, who knows this stuff inside out, openly question whether Russia would actually use nukes in scenarios like, say, Ukrainian strikes on military targets inside Russia. Is it just bluster, saber rattling?
That credibility question is, well, it's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Yeah. It's hotly debated. Look, a large-scale attack directly on Russia's nuclear forces, that would almost certainly trigger a response. That seems clear. But using nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state like Ukraine, that would likely make Russia a complete global pariah, instantly. It would also risk opening a total Pandora's box of unpredictable, potentially catastrophic consequences. No one knows where that leads.
Right.
And the fact that Western governments have continued to supply increasingly sophisticated weapons to Ukraine, despite this rhetoric, suggests they too question the ultimate credibility of these threats, or at least are willing to test those boundaries.
It's like a very dangerous game of chicken.
Exactly. A very dangerous game.
Now, when we discuss Kaliningrad and the potential for conflict there's one specific geographical feature that always comes up. It's seen as this critical choke point, the Suwalki Gap. For our listeners, maybe just quickly, what is it and why is its importance almost impossible to overstate?
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial, a vital piece of battlefield geography. The Suwalki Gap is essentially a narrow strip of land. Sources vary, but say roughly 40 to maybe 80 kilometers wide. And it runs along the Polish-Lithuanian border. The key thing is it represents the closest point between Russia's Kaliningrad Oblast and Belarus, which, as we know, is a staunch Russian ally.
So it's the land bridge, effectively. If Russian and Belarusian forces were to, hypothetically, link up across this gap, what would be the immediate strategic consequence for NATO?
Catastrophic. Precisely. If they were to connect across that gap, it would effectively sever the only land route connecting the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to the rest of NATO Europe. Cut them off completely by land.
Wow.
And Dr. Hall noted this quite pointedly. He said, there's a reason why the Russians have been training to take the Suwalki Gap for a long time. It's a very obvious strategic objective in any regional conflict scenario.
So it stands to reason then, doesn't it, that in any potential conflict, both Kaliningrad itself and the Suwalki Gap, they would be primary immediate targets for both sides, first moves almost.
Absolutely. From NATO's perspective, their objective would undoubtedly be, number one, stop any flows of munitions getting into Kaliningrad, seal it off, and effectively push that region out of the war as quickly as possible. Achieving that would also critically limit Russia's ability to project force out into the Baltic Sea with its Baltic fleet station there. So yeah, it's a vital maneuver for NATO contain Kaliningrad, secure the Suwalki Gap, protect the allies.
This whole conversation, nuclear threats, red lines, deterrence, it has such a chilling, almost nostalgic echo of the Cold War, doesn't it? What can history teach us here about the credibility of these kinds of warnings, especially when the stakes are, well, existential?
It's truly fascinating looking back. How explicit nuclear threats, putting forces on high alert, that kind of thing, it actually became quite rare after the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. That harrowing event where the world genuinely stared into the abyss, it served as a profound, stark lesson on the sheer uncontrollable dangers of escalation. The world really did step back from the brink after that.
But wasn't there a period before that, say in the 1950s, where U.S. leaders, for instance, were a bit more open, maybe even cavalier, about using nuclear threats as part of crisis diplomacy?
Oh yes, absolutely. In the early Cold War, presidents like Harry Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, they considered nuclear options an integral part of their diplomatic toolkit. It wasn't unthinkable yet. Eisenhower, for example, publicly stated nuclear weapons could be, quote, used as a bullet or anything else during the Taiwan Strait crisis in 54-55. However, by 1958, even Eisenhower himself began viewing the actual use of nuclear weapons as virtually taboo for anything less than an all-out general war. He famously said, "You cross a completely different line." So the thinking shifted pretty rapidly once the Soviets also had credible capabilities.
So the terrifying concept of mutual assured destruction, that effectively made these overt threats less credible over time, a sort of self-deterrence kicked in.
Exactly. That's the core of it. In a context of strategic parity, where both sides possess absolutely devastating nuclear arsenals, threats to actually use those weapons inherently have low credibility. Why? Because of their suicidal nature. It guarantees your own destruction, too. Now, sure, some leaders later, like Nixon, tried a sort of madman theory, trying to coerce adversaries by appearing irrational, unpredictable, maybe willing to do the unthinkable. But the clear lesson from history by the 1960s was that direct nuclear confrontations were simply too dangerous to consider or endure. The stakes were just too high for everyone involved.
Okay, so bringing it right back to today then. What does this historical perspective mean for our current situation, especially with Russia's increasingly heightened rhetoric, these lowered thresholds we talked about? Are we backsliding into a Cold War mentality, or is this something different, maybe even more dangerous because it's less stable?
Well, it raises the absolute critical question, doesn't it? Despite all these hard-learned historical lessons, is the current Russian leadership, truly willing to break international norms that have largely held, albeit sometimes tenuously, for decades? The sheer terrible carnage in Ukraine, the scale of that conventional conflict, certainly makes us ask this question very seriously. And moreover, you have the attendant dangers, always present, of accidents, incidents, miscalculations.
Right, the fog of war.
Exactly, especially with heightened alert levels, forces on edge, and these deliberately ambiguous red lines we discussed. Any of those could very easily produce the kind of unintended escalation that absolutely nobody, presumably not even Moscow, actually wants. It just underscores the critical, vital importance of clearly discerning what those red lines actually are on all sides to avoid inadvertently stumbling across them into catastrophe. Communication, or the lack of it, becomes paramount.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our curious listener? Kaliningrad, as we've seen, is far more than just some remote patch on a map. It's really a potent symbol, isn't it, of the intricate, often incredibly dangerous dance of modern geopolitics. From its unique, almost paradoxical history stuck between rivals, to its formidable military presence today, and its pivotal role in Russia's evolving and arguably more concerning nuclear doctrine. This exclave truly encapsulates the fragility of peace in our very interconnected world. The tensions we've unpacked today around Kaliningrad serve as, well, a stark reminder that understanding historical context, the nuances of deterrence theory, and particularly the dangers inherent in ambiguous threats and lowered thresholds is absolutely crucial, not just for policymakers, but for all of us trying to make sense of the world. So what stands out to you from today's deep dive? How do you think the global community, particularly those nations committed to maintaining stability and deterring aggression, should navigate this kind of high-stakes rhetoric, especially when you factor in that conventional military imbalance we talked about and this increasingly ambiguous nuclear threshold from Russia? Something to ponder, perhaps, as you continue to stay informed and curious.